Go.
Welcome everyone to the 2020 Dominican College Occupational Therapy webcast, where we are discussing research projects from this past year. This past year, we focused on sensory processing across many topics, 9 specifically. And today we have sensory processing and criminality. So this research focused on the patterns or the relationships between sensory processing and potential criminal behaviors. And this was a fascinating topic. I think anyone who works with children, I know for me personally, we don't often think about sensory integration or sensory processing issues and how it relates to adulthood. We usually think of this as a pediatric thing, especially me, having worked in pediatrics, and I know Dr. Cavaliere. And so it was interesting to take this into the next step of what do all these concepts of sensory processing, sensory integration, what does this mean in the long run for children who eventually become adults and of course still have these sensory processing patterns. So I am joined today by Dr. Catherine Cavaliere, who is a co-instructor for the research program at Dominican College. I'm John Damiao, and the occupational therapy students we have joining us today on this topic is Maritza Jean Charles, Rebecca Heim, and Ana Bianca Casira. Anything, Kathy, you'd like to add about this project?
No, I think it's, well, we'll talk about the implications, but I just want to just say off the bat that I congratulate these 3 students for doing a fantastic job on their research project and on really discovering some really important information that they're going to share with you today. So thank you guys.
So can you guys tell us how you came about starting this search on criminality? So sort of defining, how did you come to define what that was and how you went about that search among the literature?
I think initially we had the key term incarceration, and we really wanted to focus on the incarcerated people. But we found that there was very little research on this vulnerable population. So we opened up our pool of search terms to include criminality, delinquents. So that helped us get more information.
And how was it searching for those articles? Was this an easy process?
Not at all. We actually had to extend our year range out because the information was so limited. So as AB mentioned, we started off with incarceration, but really had to expand out to include those other terms because, again, it was so limited. I think at the end of the day, we only found a little over like 18 solid articles.
And I think we've discussed in class, sorry, Kathy, I just want to mention how we've discussed in class the concept that prisoners are a protected human subjects group, right? So they have certain protections that makes it not easy to conduct research on them, which it would be a vulnerable population otherwise, right? So that makes sense that you had to change your definition of what it was you were looking at. Go ahead, Kathy.
No, that's it. Thank you.
So give us a rough overview of what you found.
We found that primarily sensation avoiding and sensation seeking were the most prevalent sensory patterns amongst this population. So with sensation avoiding, we found that these individuals, they tend to avoid participation in occupations, therefore limiting social bonding. And then with having that less social bonding, they are less inhibited to commit crimes, and they have fewer outlets for any negative energy that they may have. Did someone else want to take on explaining sensory seeking, sensation seeking?
And was there research that directly correlated those concepts, those relationships, or did you have to build those bridges amongst the research?
Go ahead, Amy.
Oh, okay. We had one key article that did find that relationship. It was the only article, the only research study that actually correlated those patterns to criminal tendencies. Everything else that we found was nothing was stated directly.
And
So
can
it
you
was
tell
really
us about the article? Can you give us some information?
Yes. Shea and Wu, 2013. They actually did a study that we also used in 2012, but our key article was in 2013. And they actually gave the sensory profile to adolescents, 135 adolescents in San Francisco, who were in an OT probation, who were in probation, and it was an OT program. And that's where they found those patterns. So it was definitely a key study for us.
So when you were doing your search, so you just said you looked at juveniles who were on probation. Did you find the information on inmates only, or did you find other information on people that may be at risk for criminal behaviors? What is your review consist of? Is it just people that are in prison, or is it okay?
Primarily parolees, I think, were the bulk of our participants. But as far as the crimes that they committed, we were not privy to that. So although they were parolees, I don't think it necessarily meant that they were in jail. Maybe they were on probation. They were also on probation. So they didn't necessarily go to jail, but they committed a crime and were going on probation or on probation.
Okay.
And what was the quality of that research generally?
We had 9 level 2 descriptive studies, according to Tomlin and Borghetto. And we had 2 level 1 studies that were meta-analysis. So of the data that we did include, it was high quality. Although we did have one study that was over 30 years old.
And so you clearly have some research that clearly points in this direction and has some strong validity. Was there any research that was conducted that went against those findings, that pointed in the other direction, or no relationship?
Nothing truly comes to mind as far as what we reviewed that pointed in the other direction. A lot of these studies that we looked at really were trying to analyze, what were the characteristics leading up to them participating in criminal acts.
I think
So
sorry.
Go ahead.
Many of the articles that we did look at define sensory processing differently. So I do think that was what we did experience. So no one had like a clear-cut definition of sensory processing. And since we used Dunn's, her model, that's how we were able to acquire our articles based on like our definition.
So what do you think these findings mean for society?
I think it shows that you can't really judge a book by its cover. For me personally, it really brought to light that behavior definitely stems from sensory perception and interpretation. And if you have difficulty managing those aspects, it's going to come out in various ways. So I think it's more so informational to let, society know that it's not totally just, their fault. If that makes sense.
I was pretty much going to say that. I was going to say definitely the findings like debunk the myth that, like, pretty much what Becky said, that the person just does it willingly. Environment does definitely impact one's patterns, and then it definitely leads that person into acting upon those criminal behaviors. So that's what I definitely got out of it. And I think that, whether it's our study or another study that talks about OT and incarceration, I hope that it does bring light to a lot of people that environment plays a big time role on how it impacts an individual and the actions they take upon.
So if I hear you correctly, you're not suggesting we give criminals a free pass, but this information may help us better understand what can be worked on with those individuals to better help them manage their environments. Is that what
I'm not giving criminals a free pass. No, not at all.
And I think a similar theme has come up in a couple of, again, this is part of a larger scale, study looking at the impact of sensory health on overall health, well-being, and happiness. And this theme has come up again and again, that there's the idea of, person and the personal attributes, including sensory processing and context, right? And how the two of them come together, and how, and there's sort of this dynamic interplay that happens. And we can't say one causes the other, or the one causes, but they work together to act as supports and barriers.
So I'd like to hear just a quick snippet from each of you of what are you going to take away from this project as future clinicians?
Are you going? You could go.
I'll go. I think like a highlight that I got out of it, I think I've said it like a billion times, I'll say it again, is like the importance of interdisciplinary work, especially for a topic as complex as incarceration. Because, it is evident like OT can definitely be applied in that type of population, but, when you work with people like social workers or psychiatrists or psychologists, you get a better understanding of the person. And from there, not only does it help you understand the person, it also helps you understand the approach you want to take regarding interventions, whether it be tiered interventions or just an intervention in general. That's what I definitely got out of it. Because again, you could see from even the limitation of our research, incarceration, it's going to take a while for people to get an answer on why people do act the way that they act, aside from environment and sensory patterns. So that's what I got out of it, is to work with others. Yeah.
Also, we realized that there are so many people that are in jails and prisons. There's over 2.3 million people currently in jail and prison right now. And we also know that OTs, we found out that there's an association between sensory patterns and criminal tendencies. So, and OT works with people with sensory difficulties. So like when you connect all the dots, there's a need within the justice system. And what I know is right now is that I want to work in a prison. I want to see like how I can address their needs and hopefully somehow help reduce recidivism rates. I don't know. I feel like this project really motivated me. Also enlightened all of us. Yeah.
I think what I took away from it is that a person really can be affected by various systems and environments. So a lot of what I was kind of deducing from reading some of these articles is that their upbringing impacts how they regulate, how they interpret, perceive sensations, what they get, And then if they commit a crime, they go to jail where they get deprived of sensation, and that impacts how they regulate. And then they come out of jail and then they have to reintegrate back into a community that's very different and has very different levels of sensation. So it's a consistent changing cycle, if you will, that's impacted by environments and the systems that you encounter.
Sounds like a vicious cycle that we've created for dealing with this this issue, which is an important issue to tackle for sure.
And I wonder, guys, I don't know if you know this, but do you know how many occupational therapists are employed in prisons and in somewhere in the criminal justice system? I wonder. I think that's really interesting. Also, that would be an interesting survey. How many, if there's so many people in prisons, and we know now that there's this sort of relationship between sensory processing styles and people that are have a tendency towards, you know, criminal behaviors. Is there this large gap? Do we need to advocate more? Do we need to be present more in the criminal justice system? And prior to that, for those that are at risk. So guys, my last question then is, you know, what are the next steps in terms of research? What would you recommend to people who are interested in this topic? And based on what we know now, where do we go?
I think number one is just to have more of it, because there was a minimal amount of information. And I think step one is just building out evidence and research on the topic itself.
I agree with that. And also like getting information on the population itself. Like I understand that they're protected, but understanding like what type of crimes they committed and tying that with different sensory patterns. And also maybe addressing like how can OT address individual sensory needs within the system. Like there were some articles that mentioned some potential treatments. I think it would be interesting to like further research that.
So in closing, I would just like to hear your perception of what it was like doing a research project. I think a lot of students particularly think of it as an intimidating process, or go into it with some trepidation. Just give us your perceptions of what it was like going in and what it was like coming out the other end of it.
It was definitely long and a lot of work, but it was also really rewarding and inspiring in a way. But also, I think it's important to choose a topic that you truly care about. I think that made this a lot easier and a lot more fun. I know we all had like many conversations about this topic, and it was a really fun process at the same time, although it was a lot of work.
Well, thank you all so much for your time and talents and efforts. I applaud you guys in completing this project and bringing new light to this serious topic and new information for OTs to be able to take to practice, and I think take more seriously in terms of the type of work that we need to be doing, not just with children, but also adults, as Kathy and you've all discussed, and sort of bridging this gap between how do we get people to be more functional, more productive beings, considering, you know, we all have different biologies and different ways that we interact and perceive our environments in the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions, if anybody has any questions regarding this research project, they can email Professor Damiao at john.damiao@dc.edu, or myself, Catherine, Catherine, Cavaliere, Cavaliere, @dc.edu.
Thank you.